Hello, welcome to our latest episode of Journey to Life with my co-host Constance Fields and yours truly, ArletteJones-Lawson. Our topic today is suicide postvention, and September is National Suicide Prevention Month.
Yes, and we are so honored with our special guests today, Katie Sperry and Chaplain Justin Maynard. Just a little bit about Katie. Katie Sperry is the Suicide Prevention Program Supervisor for the Department of Veteran Affairs, North Florida, South Georgia, and she is the VISN 8 Lead Suicide Prevention Coordinator and the REACH Vet and Post-Discharge Engagement Supervisor. Ms. Perry is also a licensed clinical social worker and has worked in mental health for over 20 years. She is a graduate of West Virginia University with a master's degree in social work, and she began her career in child welfare, specifically as the initial responder to allegations of child abuse, then working to become a forensic sexual abuse interviewer, a supervisor, and expert court witness in child maltreatment. Katie has provided crisis intervention, family and marriage therapy, and has completed training courses through the University of Pittsburgh medical centers, focusing on structural family therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and completed cognitive behavioral therapy for treating depressed veterans. She is credentialed through the National Association of Social Workers as a certified advanced social work case manager and a certified advanced children, youth, and family social worker. And she also has a qualified clinical social worker license. Ms. Sperry was selected in both 2016 and 2020 by the Department of Veterans Affairs, National Director of the Suicide Prevention Program, to complete a tour with the Veterans Affairs Central Office for program improvement. Ms. Sperry travels throughout the nation speaking about veteran suicide, and we are so honored she's here. She and her husband reside in Brunswick, Georgia, with their 8-year-old son, William.
And just a little bit about Chaplain Maynard. Chaplain Justin Maynard is a veteran of the United States Coast Guard and a board-certified clinical chaplain with a specialty certification in mental health. He provides spiritual and emotional support as a clinical chaplain on an inpatient mental health unit and intensive care units. He received a Master's of Divinity degree from Duke University Divinity School. He did his clinical pastoral education at Duke Hospital, residency at Wake Med, a second-year residency and mental health fellowship at Durham VA Medical Center. He is passionate about suicide prevention and helping veterans discover meaning and purpose for living another day. He also provides bereavement, postvention support to family members who have lost a loved one to suicide. Welcome to you both.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One question. So how are you, in what ways are you finding that the reactions to suicide deaths differ from other forms of death?
So, you know, we spoke a little bit earlier about the numerous emotions that go along with suicide, which are so different from, again, like a violent death where somebody's been murdered and you feel like, oh my gosh, if it happened to them, it could happen to me. And I'm now feeling vulnerable, knowing that if it could happen to this person, that maybe what if I'm next? You know, and feeling the sorrow and the pain when somebody passes from a long illness, and those are very different from suicide. And somebody who has an unexpected death, you know, like a car accident, is that then you feel vulnerable yourself. It seems like a sense of not being real, you know, that this can't be true. I just talked to them 20 minutes ago. How is this real? So when there's a suicide, there's anger, aggression, abandonment, guilt, you know, and maybe like, and last Chaplain Maynard said, relief as well, which becomes very complicated when there's that relief, you know, on top of feeling guilty as well. So So suicide reactions can be very, very complicated.
Yeah.
You know, all of any death, we feel, you know, sadness, you know, and but suicide, we're left with sometimes more questions than what we have answers for.
Most definitely, most definitely. And like it was mentioned earlier, everybody is different and the reactions are going to be different. And, you know, what one person may have experienced a traumatic life with the person that died by suicide. And so that relief might come in or something of that nature.
Sure.
So thank you for explaining that. Let's get into postvention itself. Are there different stages to postvention?
So I would say it's different for each and every person. So there's not like a regular pattern. And so there's the initial shock phase that first day, and then we'll call a week later to see how they're doing. And usually that's a moment where if they weren't crying in the first time, the emotions are starting to hit. Maybe the funeral's already happened. Unless people are checking in maybe 2 weeks later or a month after, that's really where we try and call again to provide support and create space for them to process. They get tons of support in the first week, but slowly people don't know how to care for folks. And I also want to say that as heavy as all of this sounds, I am so inspired by survivors of suicide. So I don't want us to sound like these folks are just wallowing in it. And I see people getting better. I see people making meaning of the loss and then going out and caring for other people who have also had a loss. That is often a pattern that I find. There are support groups out there. So part of Postvention is getting them plugged into other support groups for suicide, and also the tragedy assistance program that provides peer support. Having somebody else that has lost a loved one to suicide but is further down the journey of grief, that is able to walk alongside that person, who can truly say, I know what that loss feels like because I've also had that loss. That can be very helpful. And so that is just an extra resource. So I had somebody that wanted to increase their web of support, and we were able to call the Tragedy Assistance Program, TAPS, and get them connected to peer support as well. So I see the pattern as triumphant, victorious spirits overcoming great grief and turning it into something beautiful. You know, that's the beauty of postvention care for those who have not died of suicide but survived, being able to create life and create a new opportunity for life to turn around and get that support that is so readily available with 998, a phone call away. It's incredible, the resources that are available. So I don't want us to sound like that people are stuck. It is a tremendous load to carry, but often that wound brings healing to others as wounded healers that they become.
Thank you.
I've seen it lead to activism, you know, where the survivors, you know, get really involved in making sure that no other family experiences the loss that they've experienced. So that's and you often hear them doing it in honor of or in the memory of the name of the one that they've lost. And you know, that's so positive. And that speaks to it being an energizing force as well.
Yes, there's an actual movement of you will notice in the country the semicolon is a tattoo that survivors of suicide often will tattoo. I've seen it recently, like on a hand right here, just a semicolon, or sometimes behind the ear. Sometimes there will be a religious symbol along with that colon. And that is an invitation in that movement to open up the dialogue, to talk about the struggles of life, to encourage people to seek mental health care. And as a witness of the mental health care team, I can say that I've seen miracles happen. And so that is a wonderful movement that I've seen in the country. And that person that has placed that tattoo is inviting the conversation. So I've actually had some very rich dialogue with survivors of suicide by just naming, I see you have a tattoo. I'm so sorry for your loss. And often that creates some space for them to share if they would like.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think that also helps people feel like they're not alone, especially if they recognize that in others. So that's really great. Now, I know you all spoke to the immediate postvention, which is within the 7 days of you being notified, but the short-term postvention response that happens between 1 month to 6 months, what's happening during that period of time?
So that really depends on the receptiveness of the family. I had one situation where I knew a veteran on our inpatient mental health unit that lost his identical twin to suicide. And that person was carrying a grief I've never witnessed before, because every time he looked in the mirror, he would see the source of his grief etched on his face. So how do you cope with the grief that's etched on your face? A reminder. And so I supported him through that. And when he would go around family, it would shock them because they thought they were seeing the one that he lost, his brother. And so a year later, I found out the unfortunate news that veteran died. And so I provided support to the parents and was invited to speak some words of comfort at the funeral. And every month since then, it's been a while now, over a year, almost every month we check in. And that parent is very receptive to the support, and sometimes calls me as well. And so we've provided that support, and that's been very helpful for that parent who is not only grieving the loss of one, but 2 identical twins. And that particular kind of grief is just unimaginable. But to see the resilience of people who are able to press on in the midst of unimaginable loss is very inspiring.
That Justin being invited to speak at this young man's funeral really illustrates the importance of postvention. He responded immediately and continued to respond to what the parents and the family members needed. And having that established relationship has provided such support to that family, and has really kind of helped the family to become involved in different other support systems as well. And I think that is I think that's a perfect example of why we do this work, because that family has suffered just tremendous grief, And, what we don't want is for there to be, more grief down the road. And these efforts are put in place to help prevent that.
So then I guess that's what the 6 month and beyond, the long postvention care would look like then.
Correct.
Yeah, it's whatever they're receptive to. And so we give them our contact info, and they take us up on that offer to be a listening ear, and we'll call. And then I'll be intentional to put a reminder, especially on anniversaries, to put a reminder to that person to call. And so that act of caring for somebody that's lost a loved one to suicide is preventative, because they're holding all of this in a culture where they cannot get it out. And so to provide that space for somebody, I remember there was a veteran who came to our inpatient unit who had lost a son to suicide, and he just wanted to be at the same place where his loved one died, so that he could make sure that he got to wherever his son was going. And to create some space for him to reflect on where his son is, to make sense of that loss, is an honor. I see people being able to tap into their spirituality and find this strength that surpasses understanding, that will guard their heart and protect them from the heavy memories. That is what I find incredible. And if they're receptive to prayer, echoing back that heartfelt request that I hear from them to God, to find the strength to keep standing. That was the prayer yesterday, to keep standing. And when they cannot stand any longer, to be carried. Yes. So that they can know where their help comes from.
I had someone say to me, I was going through a really low point in my life. You can ride the wagon, just don't drag your feet. We'll carry you. We'll carry you. You don't have to do anything. Just be. Just stand. Just be where you are in whatever grief you're experiencing. Just be in it. We'll carry you, but just don't make it harder on us. So it's so encouraging to know that that there's not really a time limit on the postvention efforts, and that you just kind of tailor it to the needs of the family or the survivors, and you kind of let them set the pace. And so
absolutely, we are also very sensitive not to impose ourselves and not to keep calling. If that initial call, they don't seem receptive, especially as chaplains, we want to be receptive or sensitive to the calls that we make and not impose ourselves or overly call. But if they answer the phone a month later and say, "Oh, Chaplain Justin, thank you so much for calling," then that it's well received. And that's a majority of the care. Something along that lines, as far as chaplains, we've also, postvention leads to prevention. And something I'm excited to share about in our partnership with Katie, after we did that year-long prevention pilot program, we brainstormed ways that we can continue to prevent suicide, and have increased chaplain support in newly flagged high-risk veterans, so people who just made an attempt on their life. We provide that supplemental care that the suicide prevention team and mental health providers are already providing. We address that spiritual aspect. So often people are asking questions like, will I go to hell if I kill myself? That's a spiritual question that a chaplain can help explore. Or chaplain, I've killed so many people in Vietnam, I don't deserve to live. So carrying that burden that curse often veterans express from what they had to do in the line of duty. And we call that moral injury. And that's something that chaplains are trained to provide support. And so I'm happy to report that in 20 months of our chaplain service team, there's 7 chaplains that have been reaching out to these newly flagged veterans. Out of 350 veterans that we actually spoke with in 20 months, only 9 declined to, only 9 were not willing to talk to the chaplain or declined our call. And so that really highlights the misconception that chaplains are only here for religious people, that we're here for all people. And sometimes it's calling a veteran who is, one time I called a veteran who's an atheist and wanted to talk for an hour about how ill-treated he was coming back from Vietnam. And process that anger and that that's underlying the suicidality. Another aspect of prevention is somebody who's just recently made an attempt is struggling with, let's just say in domestic violence, you can separate the person from the person that harmed from the person that was harmed. In the case of suicide, people are trying to learn how to trust that part of themselves again that tried to end their life. So really just learning like, how do I live with myself again? How do I put one foot in front of the other and depend on my spirituality to persevere and forgive myself too, and also not hold these things so heavily. And so chaplains are trained in evidence-based practices such as acceptance and commitment therapy to provide cognitive diffusion, so that these thoughts that we have do not have to become our identity and who we are, but we can give ourselves a little bit of psychological flexibility and some space and distance from those heavy thoughts. And so that is something I find very helpful in suicide prevention, and being able to do self-acceptance and forgiveness, being able to move on and not hold it so heavily, you know, being able to just accept, yes, that's in the past and I'm moving forward according to their values, and tapping it. That's another spirituality question, is what matters most in your life? Often that's living for their parents, living for their kids, being a mother or father, living for their God, their higher power, depending on that higher power for the strength to find recovery from addiction and depression, and then finding support from the rest of the mental health care team, which the chaplains enjoyed that confidence. In the chain of command in the military, the veteran could share anything with that chaplain. We're able to leverage that trust that they had to also bridge the gap to amazing folks like Katie and the rest of the mental health care team to say, if you trust me, you can trust that these people are here, they care for you, and they want you to feel so much better. They're looking out for you. And sometimes that can be really helpful, especially if they're struggling with paranoid thoughts. And what I find on the lighter note again is, I'm working on inpatient mental health. I see people coming in that wanted to die, and then a few days later, within literally a few days or a couple days, sometimes 24 hours, they are finding they feel like the weight of the world has been lifted off their shoulders. And they wish they had done this years ago. And so I get to witness that is what keeps me grounded, is seeing people come a year later to my chapel door and say how much better they feel and now that they got the help and the support and the recovery, and they're able to do what they dreams that they never thought were possible. And that's a part of the recovery too, is inviting people to think and have a positive visualization for the future. So when they're on that inpatient unit, you know, thinking through a meditation of where are you a year from now, if you're able to address what you need to get addressed. And I hear amazing like goals worth living for, like I'm going to scatter my wife's ashes on an Native American reservation. I'm going to grill a filet mignon in my backyard with my dog, which I don't have any of those right now, but I will one, you know, a year from now, once I get it. And then all of a sudden you hear people like excited about recovery, excited about, you know, a goal that's not just like, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, you know, no, it's something like, I'm going to rent an RV and travel across California, you know, and it's like, yes, I want to do that too. Sign me up, you know, and to invite them to envision, what does it taste like? What does that recovery taste like? What does that filet mignon taste like? What kind of seasoning? Let's put some flesh on that. Who are you with? How do you feel inside your heart? That is when a goal becomes a SMART goal, something time specific, worth living. Somebody who says, my goal is I want to ride It's a Small World After All, you know, It's a Small World with my kids. Or I want to have an ice cream cone on Main Street, USA, next to that Sunday shop in front of the castle. You know, like that is worth it. That in spirituality is about whatever feeds life and excitement. And so, so that is what I get to witness every single day. I always have to balance the weight of the grief with also the hope of a life worth living and enjoying. And so I get to see people come by my door and say, I feel so much better. Thank you so much for your support. And I like to tell the rest of the team that doesn't get to see that, how much better somebody is doing. And that brings encouragement to them, because often in a hospital, you're seeing people on their worst days.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you two, that both teams work together so closely as well. That's a joint effort and with the same end goal. So it's just wonderful.
It really is. And I know I shared this quote that I look at periodically that I love, that meant a lot to me. Every storm runs out of rain. Just like every dark night turns into day, every heartache will fade away. Just like every storm runs out of rain. And, you know, here years later, you know, I'm blessed with a wonderful family, a wonderful husband, great kids, just a great extended family. And, you know, all of that would not have been possible had I been successful. And so, you know, to know that, that you all in the postvention and the prevention efforts, you know, help give hope and purpose and, you know, will to live to so many people who are struggling, you know, it's just so encouraging. And it's just, you know, I mean, it really is God's work. It really is just amazing what you all do. What outreach measures or what resources are available to children whose parent may have died by suicide? I know you had mentioned something earlier. I think it was TAPS, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I've actually talked to somebody who benefited from Tragedy Assistance Program, and that's called TAPS. And so the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, TAPS, is a wonderful resource. They provided a conference in Jacksonville for survivors of suicide, but also of any sort of veteran death. But they had groups tailored fit for survivors of suicide, as well as a teen support group and for that particular kind of grief. It's really important to have groups that are specific to that loss. And so that, I've heard, has been a very helpful resource, sense of community. When survivors of suicide get in a group and then realize that they are not alone, that because that stigma is so strong, it tries to make people buy into the lie that they are especially separate and abnormal. But no, there's an entire group of folks that are coming together and they're not alone in their pain. That is extremely healing and supportive. And so that's the idea behind peer support, so that they realize, oh, I'm not unique. I am, my pain is unique, but there are other people that have shared a similar pain, can really help, that they're not alone in their pain. And so that's a great resource. There's also bibliography that we provide. So when somebody dies by suicide and we call the family, we provide a bereavement packet that has a wealth of resources for that family member. And so in that bibliography for children in particular, there are some books. One of them is After a Parent Suicide, Helping Children Heal. Another book is After a Suicide, a workbook for grieving kids. And so those are a couple. Another one's But I Didn't Say Goodbye, for parents and professionals helping child suicide survivors. And so those are some examples. I think Katie had something to share about children and survivors of suicide. I think she had a good point to make about that.
So there are a number of different resources like what Chaplain Maynard had just described. However, we give those resources to the guardians of those children to make the decision as to whether or not they want to have that child engage in whatever kind of their grief therapy, support groups for children, even just engaging in books. Many times parents have a hesitancy, or legal guardians have a hesitancy to do that, and they have to come to terms with their own grief. So the postvention process allows for us to be able to give those resources at different intervals of the postvention process. And that's not just for the adults, but for the children as well.
So I know you all spoke earlier to the effects that providers who have patients that they are helping that have died by suicide, that you all have, that there's resources out there for them as well. Can you speak to that? I imagine that, you know, that they're in a position to have those experiences, you know, more than once.
Sure. So we reach out as a postvention team to all of the providers that potentially could be impacted by the suicide. And it depends on how engaged that the veteran was with our VA. Sometimes they may have just seen primary care, specialty care, or mental health, or all of the above at the same times. So we reach out to those in a coordinated fashion. Chaplain Maynard and I and the other chaplains will many times tag team to make sure that we are reaching all of those providers, that they don't open up a chart and find out through a report that individual died by suicide, because that can be just as traumatic as the suicide itself. Right. So we really have a coordinated effort together to reach all of those providers, and many times we will offer EAP services as well. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the Veterans Crisis Line, many of the resources that we have talked about, as well as notifying their service chiefs for follow-up as well after we make that initial postvention response, so that those individuals feel like that they are supported by not only the postvention team, but their superiors too, because the effects of losing a patient can, again, you can feel very guilty. Did I ask the right questions? And you start questioning yourself and your clinical judgment as well. So our postvention response many times for staff is just as it is for family and friends if those staff members say, yes, I'd like you to follow up with me.
Mhm.
I'd like to piggyback also. That's another passion of ours, is to provide that support, because it's not business as usual.
Right.
This loss is profound for those who've really connected, and for some of these veterans, they don't have a family, and so the VA is their family. We've walked alongside, and I want to share one situation that sometimes I'll talk to staff first before I call the family, because one of my favorite questions is like, what words would you want me to say to this widow? And often I hear very powerful words of the veteran couldn't stop talking about how much she loved you in their final days. And so that can be really helpful for closure, because sometimes we are with that veteran, more recently than a family member. Each situation is different, but it really helps me too to get an idea of who the person was, and also the battles that they fought valiantly with a healthcare team. What I'm just amazed at is, the detail of care and just the work that VA mental health providers put into caring for loved ones, and or for veterans, and so they often are like a brother or sister to these veterans, and so they grieve, and we create space for them to process that grief, but also to bridge that communication to the family, to relay any condolences that they might have as well, if appropriate.
The things that you all are sharing, I know that that a lot of it, the examples that you give are kind of veteran focused, but these answers are answers for the population as a whole. The 988 number is for the population as a whole. It's for whoever out there needs help, or in at risk, or a suicide survivor, or a provider of a suicide provider, a suicide, someone that's died by suicide. These resources are available to everybody.
Correct.
To use. And so that's really the information that you all have given is so powerful, because it is for everybody. And also the whole postvention process, I think, is one that family and friends of someone who's died by suicide, somebody who doesn't know what to say. Because I know in a lot of situations when someone dies, there's people around, almost 24/7 for their first week. And then, then everybody's gone, it seems. And then they're alone in it. And I think that the whole postvention process kind of encourages people to know that there are changes in how a person feels and how they process it, is what this conversation has kind of enlightened us on. And so to know that they can, reach out in a month and reach out in 6 months. So whenever they feel the need or led to do it, and just, know that, if the person or the suicide survivor, denies them once, don't stop at that, to give them time to move on to different stages of their grief and their, their survival. So that.
And I just want to thank you both for taking time to talk to our audience about this and to expose this level of care to our communities who may not have been aware of it. Is there anything else that either one of you would want to add that you maybe didn't feel like you got to say?
We just want to thank you for the opportunity to share what we do. We're both very passionate about the prevention of suicide, and thank you for providing us a platform to be able to speak to that.
Absolutely.
You all are just amazing.
Yeah, you are.
Miss Arlette, I just want to say you're an inspiration, and I really appreciate the way that you are able to just create a platform to share these important topics. And I'm inspired just by hearing your story. So I thank you for just wonderful questions, and it's been an honor to be able to share with y'all today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We are so privileged. Constance, you want to take us out?
Sure. Well, this has been a very valuable conversation. We hope that anyone who's listening, you take advantage of the resources that we're going to list. We're going to have them listed here for you, whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening to it via a podcast. It will be listed there for you, or for you to share with somebody that you know and love. And once again, we'd like to thank our guests, and we will talk to you next time.
Thank you, and stay tuned for the next episode. Bye. Bye.